And you may be asked now if you want to stay in the meeting or not. Now's your
Hi,
opportunity. You can leave. Oh, most of you stayed. All right.
Hi, Nancy.
I am here. I just have a cold, so I'm not going to be seen or be heard.
That's all right.
All right. Well, thank you guys for coming. I'll introduce myself in a second, and then I'm going to talk for 20 minutes or so and give you an overview of my role in this project. I will see if I can get a slide running here. Hang on, let me share my screen. There's that, and that. Now, Andres, can you see that? Can you all see that title slide there?
There you go.
Amplifying the Urban Forest, and it's a large collaborative project. A bunch of entities involved, all with the logos are all there for that, and I know some of you I don't know, so I'll introduce myself. I'm Matt Ritter. I'm a biology professor at Cal Poly in San Luis Obispo, and I've been here for 18 years. And during that time, I have been studying the urban forest for a lot of it. I got a PhD at UC San Diego and then moved here to San Luis Obispo after that. And at UC San Diego, I got very interested in trees and trees that are grown in urban areas, and specifically I study eucalyptus trees in addition to other trees in the urban forest. But I got very interested in eucalyptus because they're controversial in California, and everybody seems to love and hate them, and so and there's more fear and ignorance than there is actual information. And so I have spent the career publishing about eucalyptus and other trees. In addition to scientific papers, I've written a number of books about California plants. I was the vice president of the California Native Plant Society for a number of years, and wrote a book called Trees Among Us about urban trees in California, basically how to tell them apart, how to distinguish the most commonly grown urban trees, and so on. So on the board of directors of the California Relief with Rose Epperson, who's on the call, and some other people. And it's a pass-through organization mostly that takes grant money and moves it off to local shareholders who then do planting events and things like that. I run and operate a online service, which I'll talk about, called Selectree, that I think hopefully some of you use, or if you've seen, if you've Google searched any tree photo for California, you might run into some of our photos from Selectree, because we have thousands and thousands of photos of trees on there. And that's part of the Urban Forest Ecosystems Institute here at Cal Poly. I've done a lot of workshops for the Western chapter of the International Society of Arboriculture to help people with their certified arborist certification and the continuing education units. And lastly, I was a commissioner here in the city of San Luis Obispo for 8 years. Got talked into re-upping a 4-year term by the mayor, and as close as I ever wanted to be to politics, it was pretty terrible public service involving reviewing tree removal applications and developments, and we haven't removed a tree in San Luis Obispo that wasn't controversial, and the neighbors came out and all of that, and so I had to run those meetings. Imagine like hitting a gavel and telling 2 grown men to stop yelling at each other. That's what that job was for the most part. And so I did learn a lot in that process, though, because our city has an ordinance, and the ordinance is associated with tree planting and tree removals. And I learned a lot about the value of urban forests to cities, and also the maintenance issues associated with them. And so that's where I'm coming from. And I'm going to give you an introduction to why I think diversity is important in the urban forest, and then I'll start by saying, though, thank you for being involved in this project. And the idea of this is to talk about species that we're planting through this project, and then discuss any issues and answer any questions that I can. And I'll say that we've had a lot of bad news lately with the global pandemic and all the fallout associated with that. And unfortunately, there is some actual doom and gloom, and also involved in talking about the future of tree planting in California. We no longer can or should plant the trees that we always have where we've always planted them. The map that you see here, it shows a changing hardiness zones and the general warming that's occurred in the 25 years between the publication of the two maps in the bottom right-hand corner there. What you see in red or pink in the upper left-hand corner are the areas that have shifted to a warmer zone in the time between the publication of those two maps. Trees that always grew well in certain climate zones have begun to fail in a warmer, drier climate in a number of areas in California and elsewhere. California is getting hotter. These are recently published maps by the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration showing how much the baseline climate has shifted in Southern California. This is as compared to 1895 to 2018. And most of that shift has actually happened since the 1970s. And it's just predicted to get warmer, and warmer also means drier. Most of the time in a Mediterranean climate, when things get warmer, things get drier. In California, in less than a decade, we've lost nearly 5% of the total trees in the state. And this includes native and urban forest trees. And we're basically experiencing a new reality with this precarious future for our state's trees. And this is particularly problematic because California's population is huge. We have 40 million people, give or take. It's expanding. The population is expanding from urban areas, and the wildland urban interface continues to grow. Meanwhile, we've had, statistically speaking, at least, very abnormal events happen in our climate. As an example, temperatures are rising and fires are getting worse. It's becoming nearly impossible to explain what's happening outside the possibility of a changed climate. 16 of the 17 warmest years on record in California have occurred since 2000. And we have to prepare our urban forest for these types of anomalies. And we can do that, I think, with new and better and more appropriate tree species selection. And that's what this project is about trying to find the best trees for the future of different areas in California. And we know that trees are incredibly important for the quality of life of city dwellers. There's abundant evidence for that. Trees cool cities. Having a full canopy cover provides up to 10% cooling in neighborhoods that with relatively low vegetation and shade and percent canopy cover are demonstrably warmer. And this, I don't know if you guys have all seen this, but the cover of this issue of National Geographic has a picture of these long pictures of neighborhoods in Los Angeles, and it's about the different neighborhoods and the different amount of trees in those different neighborhoods. How the people in those neighborhoods suffer from different things due to the fact that they have an absence of shade and cooling associated with their trees. Trees also reduce energy consumption. Full canopy can reduce summer energy in some places, especially hot areas, by as much as 25%. Urban trees promote wildlife. We know that. The figure here shows results from bird censusing in Seattle as correlated to tree density. And in Seattle, at least, if you want birds, you need a minimum of 5 mature trees per acre. And we now know that trees also just make people happy, make city dwellers more happy. And a number of published studies have showed this when people are surveyed on their measurement, on a number of measurements of well-being, but really their own perception of their own well-being is increased when there are more trees around and when there are more different types of trees around. And all this adds up to the obvious fact that urban life without trees is a lower quality life. So these are incredibly important. And we have to do more tree plantings, and those tree plantings have to be successful. But what is successful tree planting? How do we define success in the 21st century in this time of global climate chaos and biodiversity loss? Well, I would define it by these 3 things: human benefits, all the things I just talked about, health, aesthetics, well-being, and so on, all the quality of life stuff. But you can't ignore atmospheric carbon sequestration, now climate change mitigation associated with tree planting, and the conservation of biodiversity. A lot of scientists consider us to be in the middle of the 6th mass extinction event on the planet. And so what if we found rare trees and we planted those in cities and they became less likely to go extinct or be extirpated from populations if we conserved them and the biodiversity associated with them in cities? And if we define successful tree planting as having a component of these things, then what things converge to make that possible? Well, obviously, it's the trees we plant and where we plant them, the species selection, and the site conditions. And unfortunately, site conditions are fixed, and they're very expensive to modify. You can't change the weather in your city. You can't change the precipitation. You're just subject to those things. You can try to change the areas where you plant trees and modify soils and so on, but it's expensive. What we really have control over is planting very appropriate trees for the spots where we plant them, and then we can get success from that. If you don't do species selection properly initially, you're just fighting against a species that's the wrong thing for the wrong place for the rest of the life of that species. And usually that life is shorter anyway. And so at Cal Poly, we've worked a lot to try to deal with accurate, good, appropriate tree selection with our online tree selection tool that we call Select Tree. And it's this is an interactive tree selection guide. It's an online tool. It's partially funded by CAL FIRE, also by the U.S. Forest Service, and we've developed it over many years. And if you Google Select Tree, you'll find actually a new version of this website that we just rolled out. And it has it's a database with over 1,500 species of trees that can grow in California in it. And we have 75 characters for each of those species. And you can put in, I would like a tree that is evergreen, doesn't grow taller than 30 feet and has red flowers or something like that. And it'll query that database and pop out all the potential species. And we've worked on trying to link the results to nurseries where you can actually source the material and so on. And it's become one of the most visited tree websites in the world. And I think the best and highest quality place for accurately labeled photos of trees and so on. We have over 9,000 photos of all the trees. And here's a list of the many characters for each species, and we're adding new ones all the time. And as an example, one important character to consider in tree selection would be drought tolerance. And we've been working a lot on this character specifically lately. That's why I bring it up, which is surprisingly elusive in many tree species. What does drought tolerant actually mean? And most trees in municipal plantings don't get abundant water. They don't get abundant and regular water. In fact, they get less water than they usually need, and they get it irregularly. They get a lot of neglect is what trees and cities get. And that's why drought tolerance is one of several crucial characters necessary to think about when we select and plant trees. And there's a lot of trees in the world, and a lot of those trees in the world have evolved in places that are very drought stricken, or they get irregular water. And so those trees have evolved to be able to deal with city conditions. If we look at all the trees in the world, well, we know that there's about 300,000 species of plants. About 60,000 of those grow as trees. That's meaning they make a single trunk and a raised canopy, and it's something that which you would look at and consider a tree. And of those, if you look at all the cities in the world and you try to figure out what has ever been tried in all the cities in the world, you get to over 4,000 just of the 60,000 have been tried. You can look at that graphically like this. We have about 7% of the world's total tree species have been tried in a city somewhere. Obviously, some of these 60,000 trees are going to be wildly inappropriate for cities, but some will be great. And we obviously have not tried them yet. It's potentially possible that we do not and have not grown the best trees for our cities in California. We can do better. We can try, we can experiment with new trees, and we clearly don't have all the trees that we should be growing in the urban forest. And in fact, diversity in urban forests in California is actually declining. It's not increasing. And in 2010, when Carol Bornstein and Bob Mueller looked at the diversity on city lists, they saw this troubling trend of declining diversity. What they saw is there are only a few species being grown everywhere. And on average, they found 188 species on California municipality tree surveys. So they looked at a bunch of cities. They looked at the surveys that had been done in those cities, and they looked at the number of species, 188 species on average. So California is cities in general, they're relatively diverse compared to other places in the world. And on average, they're averaging 188 species that you would find out there in the city. Well, what they did was they found that there are only 49 species on average approved for future plantings. And so only a quarter of the existing species are approved for future on future planting lists. And these lists are of approved species. They usually get whittled down over the years, whittled down further and further and further, because there's no perfect tree. Everybody hates every tree for some reason or another at different times. And as a commissioner in the city of San Luis Obispo, I dealt with that, the fact that we have no perfect tree in the world. Something falls out of every tree eventually at some point, or a tree has to grow, and so it comes in contact with infrastructure. But could we find the most appropriate trees for the most situations? It is the question. We also have to remember that our current species palette and the current species palette of any municipality could be inappropriate for the future. And we can look to other places that are hotter and drier for the species that could potentially be successful. If we're going to plant a tree now, it has to be successful for 30 or 40 years. And so we have to look to other places for that. And we know what is growing in California, and we know what's really common because of this project. We've developed this other tool to look at California's urban forests in a way that we've never been able to before. We've gathered inventory data from our partners at West Coast Arborists and A Plus Tree Care, Davy, Cal Fire, and we aggregated all this professionally sourced data into a single massive data set. And if you Google search California urban forest inventory, you'll find this, and I can drop that link into the chat where you can actually go to the area that you are operating in, and you can see what the most common trees are and how many of them there are around. And because of this, we know which species are the most widely grown everywhere. And if you look at California in general, this is what you see. There's the top 8 most commonly grown species in California. The crepe myrtle, the Bradford pear, and the London plane are the winners over and over again. And all of the cities that I listed and I said at the beginning of this presentation, those are the species that are probably within the top 10, if not top 5 most commonly grown species in those areas. The crepe myrtle, the Bradford pear, and the London plane. Are they the most appropriate, or are they the things that just ended up in the landscape because people either spec'd them because they knew about them, or they were widely available at nurseries, or there's many other unsatisfactory reasons why trees make it into the landscape, not that they're the best, most appropriate species for the landscape. So why does diversity matter in urban forests? Well, first of all, new diseases are often species specific, at least their initiation. And so diversity in an urban forest with a bunch of different types of trees can lead to more resilience to disease. We have changing urban conditions, and it's unclear what species will thrive and which ones won't. So not putting all our eggs in one basket is a valuable thing for urban forests. And a more diverse, more healthy urban forest, it actually just increases the utility of it for all the things I talked about, and habitat, resources for wildlife, shade, runoff, pollution, climate change mitigation through carbon sequestration, all of that. And I believe, and I think probably a number of you do as well, that diversity is beautiful. People are more interested in an urban forest if it's got more different types of species in it, and they find that this time of year these things are blooming, and this time of year these things are blooming, and it's interesting, and people care more about it if it has more diversity and it's more beautiful. So the idea behind this project is can we break the cycle, is to try to think about, can we find ways to break the cycle of less and less diversity? Can we plant more interesting trees in the urban forest throughout California? And if so, what trees do we want to experiment with? So that was my part on this project, is try to figure out which species should we experiment with in different areas or regions throughout California. Here's our species lists for the Northern California, the region that you all are in, Central, Desert, and Southern California. And not only did I work on trying to select these species to see if they're appropriate or not and experiment with them. But also, I'm going to be analyzing data for how these trees actually do after the planting event into the future. We're going to learn a lot about these species through this project. And so you are part of a much larger project of us learning, can we find new species for California that are going to do better in the future than what we currently have. So here's the list of species for Northern California, Sacramento Valley, Bay Area cities and towns and municipalities. What I want to do is I want to go over some details of all these species. You can look at them as we go. You can ask me questions. You can interrupt me as we go, or you can save questions for the end. It doesn't matter, and I'll go over a little bit about each one, show you some photos of these species, because these are the species that we're targeting for the cities or municipalities that you're in. And I'll start by saying that somewhere around a third of these species are from Australia. And in general, Australian trees tend to do well in California. We have a lot of trees and species from Australia that are in the urban forests in California. These are the acacias and the eucalyptus and the Brisbane box, which is all over the place, or the melaleucas and bottle brushes and bottle trees and so on. These are all species native to the continent of Australia. And there's a reason for that. It's not just random. And it's not like we've had a lot of migration from California to Australia and back and forth. And that's why we have the trees. Australian trees tend to do well in California, and Australia it's the hottest, driest, flattest, oldest continent. It's been above the water since longer than any other landmass, and the soils are degraded, and places where there is water, the water comes irregularly, and it's hot in general, and there's large desert areas towards the center of Australia. And so trees that have evolved in Australia have evolved in a crappy environment. And then we take them to California and we grow them in a crappy environment, which is a street tree well in some city that mimics Australia. It's dry, it gets irregular watering, it's got crappy soil, and they tend to do well. And so what happens in California is when you plant a bunch of trees all over the urban forest, you shower them with neglect. What you have left is a bunch of Australian trees, and they tend to do better. And so the Australian trees are in California for that reason. Well, also Australia has cities, and Australia plants species that are native to Australia. They plant species that are native to California, all kinds of stuff there. But we can learn from Australia and what they're planting and see if we could learn more about what would be more appropriate for the future of California. And I'll mention something about eucalyptus because they're controversial in the Bay Area and throughout Northern California, throughout California, really less so in Southern California because there's less water in Southern California, and they don't have any issues with weedy eucalyptus in Southern California. But in Northern California, where there's more summer fog and precipitation, there are some species of eucalyptus, particularly a blue gum, that grows and reproduces on its own. But I should mention that eucalyptus is a large genus. It's a genus of 800 species of trees, half of which are small shrubs. Australia is covered with shrublands. They call it their mallee there, and about 400 species of eucalyptus max out at a height of less than 10 feet. We don't grow most of those in California. They aren't around, but they're there. So it goes from 10 feet to some of the tallest, biggest trees in the world in places like Tasmania. So in size, there's a massive amount of diversity in those 800 species. And in bark, in leaves, in every character you can think of, there's a massive amount of diversity in those eucalyptus. But what people think of when you say eucalyptus in California, they think of one species. They think of the blue gum, Eucalyptus globulus, a wildly inappropriate, terrible urban tree that is the result of, from the 1850s onward, a planting boom of this specific species in California because people thought that they were going to make a bunch of money off of wood. Turned out not to work out. Young trees make bad wood. And so we have the results of an unharvested crop all over the Bay Area, and that's what people think of when they think of eucalyptus. Well, in California, there's over 300 species that have been introduced. They're all over the place. Most of those are just in botanical gardens and so on. There's a few number of species that are widely planted, and 18 species I have been able to find evidence that they are growing and reproducing on their own. One of those is the blue gum. So there are really great, very drought tolerant, small to medium sized eucalypts that would do well in our cities, and currently do well in Australian cities and cities in other places in the world. And what if we experimented with those? And they suffer from the fact that they share the name eucalyptus, but they're totally different trees and very different than a blue gum. An example of one of those would be the silver dollar Eucalyptus cinerea or Argyle apple tree, which is from very dry areas of New South Wales. It's got this soft, non-shedding, very stringy reddish bark and silvery blue leaves. It's a beautiful tree, and maxes out at about 35 feet, and it could be a totally appropriate tree for growing in parks and so on in urban areas. Another very small Eucalyptus preva, the orange gum, is in our project. We're experimenting with that. That's a species. It's about a 20-foot species. There's a few of them in Gilroy at the Gavilan College campus, and I don't know where they got them, but there's a few of them there, and they're spectacular trees there. They grow really well. Another species planted in Oakland and some other places is a small to medium size eucalyptus called Eucalyptus spathulata, or the swamp gum. It's got this very silvery, almost steel-like looking bark, and very narrow linear leaves. If you just look at the leaves, you may not even recognize it as a eucalyptus, and it's an incredibly drought tolerant species. I'm going to do this real quick. Okay, there we go. Now there's a species in our list that we're targeting also that's related to eucalyptus, called Angophora costata, the rose gum. Spectacular tree grown in a number of cities in Australia. It's got a salmon colored smooth bark and dark green leaves, and flowers beautifully, and it has small, very thin, almost papery fruit that have no fruit fall issues or anything like that. So they like that a lot in Australia. Another species, a spectacular flowering tree that does very well in coastal areas, is the Corymbia ficifolia, the red flowering gum. Those are related to eucalyptus. Another species that's related to eucalyptus is a small tree, often used as a street tree. There's a number of them growing in Golden Gate Park, and this is the turpentine tree. Has a very furry, bluish green leaves, smooth reddish bark, and is about a 20-foot tall tree. Not a very impressively large tree, but very good for urban areas. Now that's the Australian species. There's a number of other species that are not Australian that we're also targeting for this project. One of those could be a surprise to some of you, and it's the species that's native to Hawaii. It's actually endemic to Hawaii, found only in Hawaii, and this is koa, or acacia koa. It's a species of acacia that occurs in native forests in Hawaii, and it turns out to seem to grow very well in California. We didn't know this, but when we started planting it in California, I've collected a number of sources of this species at high elevation, cooler areas in Hawaii, and it grows really well as a great tree in California. Another thing that we're very interested in when we're planting trees is what's going to happen to that tree at the end of the 40 or 50 years of its life. What happens to the trunk of it? And acacia koa makes one of the world's most valuable woods now. And there are a lot of entities that are interested in urban milling and using that wood for all kinds of things, in which the that tree sequesters carbon its entire life, and then it doesn't go right back into the chipper and get rotted and back out into the atmosphere, but we actually capture the wood and capture it and use it for something, and acacia koa is a good target for that. Another small little evergreen tree that we're interested in and growing a lot of is the Japanese blueberry. It's a beautiful tree that makes little frilly white flowers, and when the leaves get old, they turn this bright red color. The South African wild plum is on our list. It's got kind of a succulent trunk, very drought tolerant tree, native to South Africa, and it has the potential to do really well. About a 20 to 30 foot tall tree after being pretty old. New Pittosporum floribundum, or the Himalayan Pittosporum. They have a number of these in Santa Barbara, and they do really well there. And they tend to do they seem to do well in areas in Northern California. In the East Bay, there's a few of these species, and so we thought, oh, we might as well try more of that. Maybe they're very good for Northern California, Bay Area, Sacramento towns. We'll find out. We also in this project are targeting a number of oaks, and these are oaks from the southwestern United States or northern Mexico that tend to be dry, that are used to some summer watering, which is very typical of what happens in irrigated young trees in California. And these are Quercus canby, or Canby's oak, Cambii. There's Quercus hypoleucoides, the silver-leafed oak, a beautiful oak that's native to the Chiricahua Mountains in southeastern Arizona. The Arizona blue oak, and the netleaf oak, Quercus rugosa. So those are 4 oaks that are really great species, very underutilized, very undeservedly rare in California. I think they could do very well, and we're gonna find out if they do well. And then one last species I'll mention that is in this project, and that's the soap bark tree from Chile, native to Chile. It's sort of equivalent to California's coast live oak in the Mediterranean climate areas of central western Chile. And it's Quiaja saponaria is how you say that name. A soap bark tree is occasionally grown throughout California, just only occasionally. It's rare, and it probably shouldn't be. It tends to look really good, like a nice little evergreen tree where it's grown. And the photos that you see there are two individuals that I took pictures of in San Francisco. I think there are 5 total trees in San Francisco. And they tend to do well in compacted areas and don't do a lot of infrastructural damage or anything like that. So we thought, oh, what if we made Quiaja from something rare to something was more widely grown? And so the idea behind this is for us to try new species and specific plantings. We'll learn more about them, and we are all part of a much larger project to learn about, can we plant some species that haven't been planted widely in California? And they haven't been planted widely, not because they're terrible, but because we just didn't know about them, or we have not tried them. Now we have the opportunity to try them. We are interacting with a number of nurseries that are growing them. And so we will use this data from your plantings to inform future recommendations for plantings elsewhere. And I hope that you all, in partnering with us and collaborating with us on this project, you think of this as a good PR opportunity for your municipality, and that you are taking part in a larger climate change research situation in which we're trying to figure out the trees that will work best for the future of California in the areas where we're growing them. My contact information is there, and mritter@calpoly.edu, and there's my phone number. Hopefully we'll talk and we'll answer some questions right now. But if you think of things you want to ask me about, or anything about this, or any trees in general, I'm totally stoked to answer emails from you and get clarity about this. So I'm going to stop my share right there and go over here and give you all the opportunity to, I see there's some stuff in the chat. You guys mostly just are talking to each other, or, you want the link to the inventory. I'll drop that in the chat right now. Unless, did you do that already, Andres? Or
no, I haven't. No.
Okay. There's
Yeah.
there's the link for that. That should be coming through to everybody. Nope, I sent it directly to Bill for some reason. Sorry about that. There it is to everyone. Nope, I copied something else. Yikes. Okay, so let's do this. Grandpa has just learned how to use his computer, apparently. Yikes. Okay, there it is, right there. Nailed it on the third try. And then the San Francisco plants many species from Australia. Are they recommended for the Central Valley? Some of them are, and I think that every different conditions in different places, and we thought a lot about that when we selected the species for these. There is nothing on the list right here that is not cold hardy. So, for instance, there's a number of species that will grow in San Francisco that won't grow in Sacramento. Why is that? Well, because Sacramento has the 10-year event that will kill every individual in that species, right? And so those things happen. The only one that's marginal on the list that I gave you is the Angophora, the rose gum that I showed you. That thing's marginal. We just don't know how cold hardy it is. There's not enough of them out there for us to know that. But if you're really worried about cold hardiness, and I know some of you are more interior in your cities than others, then let's avoid that species there.
Hey, Matt, David with the Woodland Tree Foundation.
Hey, David, how's it going?
Good, appreciate the presentation. And I have one of your books that I really wonderful.
Nice.
So on the eucalyptus,
Yeah.
we plant a lot of trees on the state highway between Woodland and Davis through Adopt a Highway.
Yep.
Mostly valley oak, but other species. We actually got turned down by Caltrans's arborist, I guess, at their Marysville office to plant eucalyptus. I think we asked about I think it's the ironbark.
Didaroxylon, yeah, that's very typical of those highway plantings, yeah.
Have you interfaced with Caltrans? I mean, to me, that would be a great way for trials and introductions. And
yeah, we've interfaced with Caltrans. Caltrans, a wing of Caltrans is based here locally in San Luis Obispo, and the problem with Caltrans is that they are, they have landscape architects that are working for them, and their species bias is what comes into play. They don't necessarily want to plant the most appropriate things. They plant the things that they think they like.
Right.
And that's fine. Well, by the way, the valley oak is a great species there. And if you can get success from it, that's good, especially between Woodland and Davis, where the soil is rich and the water table's high and so on.
Right.
Good luck trying to use valley oaks in a lot of the areas of California in city highway medians. It just won't work. And so it's just site dependent, and some people from Caltrans are better than others with regards to their knowledge of what's available to them.
Okay, just a quick follow-up. You probably know people at the UC Davis Arboretum. They've had, I think, fabulous success with the public on their plant sales. Their Arboretum All-Stars, which are deemed appropriate for our climate.
Yep.
I think what you're doing would probably dovetail a lot with what they do, and perhaps some of these species you recommended that maybe aren't widely available could be promoted in our region by the UC Davis Arboretum and maybe made available at plant sales.
So I'll say, David, that Emily Griswold, who runs that program,
right.
We've given her a ton of seedlings from all of these.
Oh, perfect.
So she's growing and propagating them, and they're targeting certain species, and we're targeting other species, and so on. So yeah, she's doing great work to try to increase diversity, and all the oaks that I showed you on here, we've given them all to them.
Great.
because again, they're trying to go for certain diversity, and we're doing the same. So yeah, we are definitely connected. I think this is a great idea. It's a great idea to think of what can we try in California that will work into the future that we haven't tried yet. That's great.
Thank you. It's terrific.
I have a question.
Ingrid, go ahead.
Oh, thank you. Since 1975, I have a commercial property in downtown Clayton, and it has a huge elm tree. The branch is very huge. There are 3 separate trunks actually going up. The tree is huge. One of the branches almost touched the building, so I thought, what am I going to do with this? Well, then I decided to spend the $3,200 and I had it trimmed. It is beautiful now. So what's the life expectancy for this tree? It was there when I bought it in 75. And it doesn't
Hang
have
on,
deep
Ingrid, I'll ask you to pause there for a second. I missed what species of tree is it?
elm tree, they call it. And I didn't see it on
Oh,
your
an
list.
elm. Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, great.
So now it looks very beautiful, very healthy. Does it have deep roots? I mean, it survived for many, many years, 45 or 50 years.
That elm, I'm assuming it's probably an American elm. It could be almost pumila. There's a number of popular species of elms that would occur there. I'd have to look at it to tell you what species it is. But its life expectancy, Ingrid, is forever. It's just going to grow on and on and on, and will just be a long-lived tree. And so. They can grow for hundreds and hundreds of years. What I mean by forever is in the time scale of humans.
That's a big word.
Yes. A long time. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. I had it trimmed 14 years ago, and then now it looks beautiful and healthy and happy. My tenant is happy, and I'm happy.
That's
thank
great.
you.
Awesome. Thank you. Rolf.
Yeah. I'm with the Woodland Tree Foundation also, and also on the City of Woodland Sustainability Committee, which is
cool,
newly formed. So I'm working on urban forestry issues mostly on that committee. But what about blue oak, Quercus douglasii? It's a native, and it's not as large as the valley oak. We don't have very many specimens in woodland.
That's because it's not native to woodland.
That's right, but might it be a good candidate for the future due to just the increasing drought and heat and conditions?
Well, Rolf, we have 20 species of oaks in California. 10 of them are shrubs, 10 are trees, and of those 10 species, you could try a lot of them. And the blue oak is California's probably one of the most drought tolerant trees, or drought tolerant oaks in California. The native range of the blue oak is in a big ring around the Central Valley, basically. The Sierra Nevada foothills, North Coast Range, and South Coast Range. It doesn't occur down in the valley areas. Oftentimes too wet, too outcompeted by other species and so on. And it tends to occur higher up in the elevation in the foothills. And you often see it co-occurring with valley oak, where valley oak will be in the low alluvial plain and blue oak will be just slightly up on the dry hillside right above it. Now, as the lower areas of California get hotter and drier, blue oak could also become more appropriate. The reason why I gave you the oaks that I gave you on this list and why I think that those are going to be good oaks is because those oaks are also from very dry areas, so similar to the blue oak, related to the blue oak, also not native to woodland, but are capable of handling summer irrigation. Blue oak will croak if you water it during the summer, especially mature blue oaks that have not gotten a lot of water. And the reason, well, there's all kinds of reasons for that. They evolved in a Mediterranean situation, which they evolved with long, hot, dry summers. But the species from southeastern Arizona are different from that. And why we've targeted those is that they mimic a situation in which you plant one of those species, and for the first 3 to 5 years of its life, you have to give it summer irrigation to have it actually get established. And so it's likely going to be established better if it's not a blue oak. Though blue oak is worth trying, I think, okay, so Rolf, let me just say a more global answer to your question as well about provenance of species. So provenance being a fancy word for where species come from, and should that be a component of what we care about when we do tree selection? And the answer is yes, in some sense. If we care about preserving California biodiversity, though, we need to protect blue oak woodlands where they occur. and at the same time consider the blue oak for planting in urban areas. But the problem is if some species are inappropriate for urban areas and we keep trying them and trying them, good example would be the California sycamore in Los Angeles, which they try over and over and over again because it's a native tree. Well, it's only native to riparian areas, and it fails in dry street wells and so on. And so the protection of biodiversity in California is incredibly important. However, native trees are not always the only and the most appropriate things, because we've changed the planting areas in our cities so much, and we've changed the microenvironment so much that they, even though they're native to the hillsides around that city, they are not going to do well in cities. And so, and we've seen that by evidence over and over again. And so there's this trend and I would say in urban forestry and in gardening and so on in general, is to plant more and more natives. And I'm fine with that trend, but people in cities need good urban forests, and they need successful planting, and that's not always native trees. And I'm not saying that this is your opinion or anything. I'm just giving you a more global idea about native trees in California, and the not a single one of the species that I just showed you and that is targeted for this area is native, and that's purposeful. That's actually we're fine with people planting native trees, and I know that's going on, but outside of that trend, the trend towards diversity is what we're in cities is what we're going for.
Okay, great, thanks.
Yeah. And I always feel like I have to say, and by the way, I wrote a book about California native plants. I was a vice president of the California Native Plant Society. I love these plants. California's biodiversity is amazing, and it needs to be protected where it occurs. And at the same time, non-native trees tend to be more appropriate and successful in cities because of the reasons that I brought up about how it's just neglected, terrible soils and so on. And I'll make one, since I'm doing this, Rolf, I'll make one more point. And that's that there aren't very many appropriate native trees in California for planting in cities. I mean, here's what I mean by that. We have 100 species of trees in California, 100 species native to California, give or take one or two. I've counted all of them. I looked at the native ranges of all of them. And many of those are high elevation Sierra Nevada trees. So you can just eliminate a bunch of them because of that, because you're never going to get a bristlecone pine to grow in a city or something like that. And then and you whittle it down further to oak woodlands and riparian areas. The riparian trees tend to fail because they need water year round, and they don't get that in urban plantings. And then you're left with things that grow in oak woodlands, these 10 oak species. And so it's just not a very broad palette left over from that.
Matt, are we going to be able to access these Arizona oaks on your list? Can we expect our local wholesale nurseries like in Dixon or?
Yeah, so yeah, yes is the answer, because we are interacting. One of our partners on this project is Dave Tuschler from Devil Mountain Nursery, who's a massive wholesale nursery now. I think it's one of the largest nurseries in California, is growing a ton of all of these species. He is a strong enough believer in these species as being appropriate for California and him having a market for them in the future, that he's willing to risk way more than anybody on this call is risking, by the way, that he's growing all these trees and he's putting effort into them in a way that, you know, what are we doing? We're just like talking and we're planting them, right? And we're like going to look at the results of that. But he's got a lot of money invested into this, and I think that's great because I think he's right. I think they're going to be great, and I think that the more of these things you grow, and the more of them that people see, the more they'll ask for them, and the more diversity we can get back into California's urban forests.
What was the name of that nursery again?
Devil Mountain Nursery. They actually bought the tree nursery portion of Brightview, which used to be Valley Crest. So they are a huge grower of trees now in California. They have sites in their biggest site is in Lodi.
Okay, perfect.
But they have sites in and around Ventura and Southern California and so on.
Okay.
What other questions?
Hey, Matt, it's Eric, Sac State. Great presentation, informative and a little alarming. So we have some blue gums, red gums, and both have caused, they're hazardous.
Yeah,
Yeah, we
They
fortunately
should
know
be
it has
removed
been.
where possible.
Yeah, and the climate has done that for us in a couple of cases. On windy, wet days, they have fallen over. So one question is, because one of the concerns is that they seem to get awfully large and maybe larger than they should. And so I'm wondering if we've been watering them too much, or we have a high water table where we are. And people have brought that up for other species too. So
No,
and so
I'm sorry to cut you off, but I'll just say this. A species is going to grow to the size it's going to grow if it has access to water. It's a genetically determined thing. Both of those species are massive trees. If in the same environment, if you planted a small species of eucalyptus, that's like the things we put on this list, it would never get big. They don't grow big. They're not there. It's a human can only get as big as it does. And so the same is true of some species of trees. They don't get bigger and bigger and bigger. And so the reason why we've selected these is they don't become monsters.
okay, and so that does answer my question, because that would, for some of the people that are influential in some of these decisions that I'm going to, present, that's one of their concerns. Another just kind of a fun question. So I was told that one of the reasons the eucalyptus were planted here is to provide wood for railroad ties, and so you have a lot of ukes along train tracks. And I've never been able to find out exactly if that's true. I don't know if you have any information on that.
I got a ton of information on that.
In the library.
Yeah, but I'll recommend one book. This is a rad book, you guys. If you haven't read it, this is awesome. This is called Trees in Paradise. It's the history of California told through 4 species, which one of is eucalyptus, redwoods, palms, and citrus. And the eucalyptus chapter will answer all. This Jared Farmer is a friend of mine. He's a historian on the East Coast. He's at Princeton now, and you'll love it. And the answer is, like, people were prospecting at that time. They were buying property, planting eucalyptus to make it for a profit. That's what was going on. And so they were everywhere. Railroad ties, posts, pylons, all that kind of stuff. That was the whole thing. And what we have is this unharvested crop all over California. And I'll mention that they are a group of species that will thrive on neglect. And so you get a tree where you often have no right having a tree with those species. And so that's why they're around. And that's why, they get big with no additional water and nothing. And so yeah, but if you read that chapter on eucalyptus, I don't know, it's 50 pages or something like that, you'll think of yourself as an expert. It's awesome.
Thanks. Yeah, I'll check that out.
Okay, well, hey, let me say this, because we're right at 11, that I just want to thank you guys all from these Northern California cities and Central Valley cities for being part of this project. It is a larger thing than each of us individually. We're going to learn a lot about these species, and I really appreciate your collaboration and flexibility with doing this project with us. And we're going to interact for a long time, looking at these species and learning a lot.
And I will say that we had a few Central Valley cities pop in. We're just finishing up the Northern California cities right now, so just hang tight for the.
Yeah, I'm gonna stop the recording here, and then I'll start it again. How's that? Well, we'll do that so we can. There's that, and.